Okay, so we should be live now. If anyone's there early, we will be waiting around for another minute or two just to let everyone file in. So we apologies for the awkward silence, but we'll just wait here for a moment. Okay, so it may not be showing on LinkedIn yet. It should be. There's a delay. I had an issue before, so it should be up. So we're up and running on LinkedIn Live. We will begin in a moment or two. We can take comments as well. So if you're here and on stream, could you just put a hi in the comments just to say hello so we know people are here before we start? I know there's a delay, so the highs will probably kind of start coming in shortly. Right, let's give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we will begin. I say there'll be a bit of a delay, but people will start picking through. Okay, we're starting to get the highs through. I say a bit of a delay, so anyone drops a comment, and it will take a little while to come through. So 1 second. Right, now we've got people online. Shall we begin, Luke?
I think so. Let's go.
Great. Okay, so hello everyone today, and welcome to our webinar LinkedIn Live session. As you know, we're going to be talking about testing, the fun topic, testing your web form, specifically tips, tricks, advice around that is brought to you by myself and also Luke from SiteSpect in conjunction with Experimentation Elite. So we'll kick off with a little bit of introductions so you know who we are. So those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Alun Lucas. I'm the Managing Director of Zuko Analytics. Zuko is a form analytics platform which has been designed to help you understand the UX problems on your forms so you can fix them, and then you can improve them, improve your conversion rate in conjunction with a good experimentation and A/B testing platform, which brings me nicely on to SiteSpect. So I'll hand over to Luke to make the introduction.
Yes, thanks, Alan. Hi all. So I'm Luke Hardwick. I am an optimization consultant at SiteSpect here in the UK, as my accent will give away. So yeah, I've been doing experimentation, I would like to admit. But yeah, helping all our customers here in the UK use SiteSpect for their experimentation, personalization, recommendations, and so on, to ultimately improve user experience and drive conversion through the use of SiteSpect, which is a server-side network deployed experimentation solution.
Great. Okay. So before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. There is a bit of a delay because it's LinkedIn Live, so we may pick them up as we go through. We may pick them up at the end. We're aiming for half an hour. There may be a little bit of overspill for questions, depending on how many there are. So we'll do it that way. We will be in touch to make the recording and also the slides and any associated templates available to you afterwards. So don't worry about taking notes. You can always get them, and you can always reach out to us and get them as well on LinkedIn if you want to. But to start on the topic first, let's start talking about the first part of any form testing program, and essentially that's the discovery. You know, how do you know what's wrong? What do you do first? So, Luke, as the form expert, do you want to talk about that in terms of your approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess as with any kind of experimentation, it's to start with data, right? To do what does that mean? It means starting with data. You have all these rich resources typically when it comes to data for your web analytics, but you know, using that to really pinpoint where you need to start and where the biggest opportunities are is important. If you don't have those metrics, then my first recommendation would be, you know, get those set up. Your web analytics should be showing you a lot of this stuff. If it's not, there are other solutions that you can use, obviously, including experimentation tools, which have, you know, some capability there in terms of providing insights. If you do have the data, which is obviously where you want to get to, then where do you start there? Well, you start with where are your biggest drop-off points, right, in your forms, whether it be steps or in between fields, for instance. So you're looking at percentage drop-offs, and you're looking at the volume of those drop-offs, because you're going to want obviously high percentages and high volume to really give you your kind of biggest potential opportunities to affect change. That's very important. Obviously, then once you've got that, you also need to start looking and considering segments, right? What are your groups of users, and do these drop-offs differ across those users? So it could be simply devices, browsers, geos. Mobile is obviously such a big part of everyone's experience now that you should really, in most cases, be leading with that, unless you're a very unusual business with significant desktop traffic. And also, I would recommend looking at the differences in terms of people completing forms versus people who aren't completing forms, and how those kind of KPIs differ across those two groups and types there, because it might allow you to work backwards from your kind of your best converters to apply some of those changes to your least best converted.
Yeah, and sort of, to build on that, Luke. Yeah, we see that the outcome is often where you look at, because that's where there's a difference in behaviour, and it's a difference in behaviour that's related to abandonment. So it's sometimes you see them, you know, people behaving differently, but they don't abandon. You know, for example, it might be an error message that they can quickly and easily fix. But sometimes you'll see people who abandon going back to a form to try and fix it a lot, but they can't fix it. Whereas people who complete it go back once and fix it and it's done. And that's where you can dig into the data. So an example of that we've had recently is with address finders. So we found that a certain segment of people were going back 5-6 times and then dropping out. Okay, what's there? And then upon investigation, it's like, okay, not everyone's address is in the address finder. So therefore, that was the issue that was causing drop-off. So literally by doing that, we wouldn't have known it if we'd looked at the audience as a whole, but by segmenting it, we could isolate that and come to a hypothesis. And then just a final point on the devices that you mentioned at the start, that's absolutely crucial. I mean, we see that a lot. And I think one of the issues is designers often design on a big Mac or whatever, and it's then comes into mobile and you think, hey, this drop down with 100 options isn't that bad. I can do that on my Mac. But actually, when you've got someone with their phone in front of you scrolling through, you know, to try and find their country or whatever, it's suddenly like, oh my goodness, it's a terrible experience. And so it is you know, pretty much the first thing you'll look at in terms of segmentation. But anyway, I'll let you continue with
it. Absolutely, very, very good point, Sarah. And you talked about errors as well, which brings me to my next point, which is, are there fields that are throwing errors? Do you have that data? Which ones are throwing the highest errors? Is something just broken and needs fixing as well? There are scenarios where you may not need to or want to test that. It just doesn't work, and therefore you need to fix it, right? Are certain fields causing people to hesitate? That's another good indicator that something's maybe overly complex. You know, qualitative data, heat maps, session replays, and things can surface some of that uncertainty for users that you may want to then address. And another one that doesn't get taken up that often, but is actually also very, very helpful is customer services and complaints. That getting a feedback loop from people who are speaking to your customers regularly, either via chat or on the phone, can really help you highlight what the most common problems are and what the most common sticking points are.
So once you've got your data, then what the next stage is, okay, what do we do with it? How do we plan? And so I think that's kind of the next stage, isn't it? And as a professional optimizer, how do you go about that?
Yeah, so making a plan, obviously, it's process based. It's not glamorous, but it's very important. It can make or break what you're doing. So first of all, I've got share here. Now sharing what you've obviously gone through your discovery phase, share your data and your findings with stakeholders. If you want to bring people in to support the program and to suggest ideas and kind of grow your form testing and your wider testing as well, then really you want them to have access to the data that has allowed you to isolate and locate and focus where you should really be prioritizing your efforts, so that when they do come with ideas, they're coming with ideas based on knowing where those biggest problem areas are. So that's a big piece. And then, of course, once you've got this out to people, how do you actually then start to collect the data? How do you start to then collect the ideas? So do you just have a form that you allow people to fill out, whether it's digital or physical, if you want to be old school? Do you have workshops where groups can come together? Do you have an open office once or twice a week or once a month where people can come and talk about these ideas? Ultimately you want to kind of socialize that and build that culture, which will really help with. And then once you've got those collected ideas, where do you then store them, right? Do you need to put them into a roadmap, a product experimentation roadmap? So what does that look like? Well, you want to keep that simple, ideally shareable and customizable, so you can kind of tweak it to your needs as they evolve. So, you can start with simple things like Google Sheets, but there are other tools, Trello's, your Jira's, your Mondays, and so on, where you might consider storing some of this information to allow users to access it across the business so they can see what's going on when it comes to your form testing. So that can be very important there.
And do you have your own at SiteSpect? Do you have your own template or process that you've developed yourself?
Yeah, we have a few there. I mean, there's different frameworks you can use within these kind of roadmap templates to prioritize things. I mean, ultimately, what you're going to want to do is make sure that your web forms align with your audience's motivations and balance that against the business's goals, right? But there are a few different ways with these prioritization frameworks. You can use like PI, which is potential, impact, effort as well. But there's other things there are customizable versions, and I do have a few examples of these, which I'll be happy to kind of share with folks. After that.
Yeah, so without going into too much detail, because obviously we've got a lot to cover, I guess if someone's interested in, they can reach out to you on LinkedIn and you'll be happy to take them through it in more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Connect with me and I'll happily share what I've been using over the past few years for kind of prioritizing.
No problem. Yeah, because that's a topic in itself. Now, when we talked, when we talked prior to this, we talked a little bit about the topic of fake door testing, which kind of does that fits into your planning or progression or just initial data gathering piece? I mean, how do you see fake door testing? It's kind of sometimes has a bad name. It can cause customer issues, but obviously it's a very valuable technique that you can use to get more information.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who's not aware, fake door testing is where you might present an option to users that you haven't actually fully implemented and isn't actually available, but you're doing this to gauge interests and ultimately to build a business case for a new feature or a significant change on the site. Don't be afraid to do this. I would say it is a big thing. Sometimes businesses are, and sometimes this is the only way that you might be able to build that business case. It can be very cost effective and quick to determine kind of user desires and potential value without big, heavy upfront investment. Forms is a great place for this as well, right? When you think about payment options, maybe gift wrapping options, shipping options, loyalty schemes, all manner of things that you would potentially see in a checkout or in forms in other locations on the site. And you can mitigate risk here. You can have apology messages asking for forgiveness, nudging to alternative options, and even limit the impact, right? You can throttle traffic down with most experimentation solutions so that you're not showing it to everyone and one maybe disappointing the bulk of your users. And here's a great example in a payment section is just gauging the interest of actually implementing PayPal. You can see here that there's credit card options, but then you've also got a PayPal button. And when clicked, you're getting a simple error message. It's in line with how other errors on the site are presented, where it says, sorry, PayPal's not available at the time. Please just, please go on and pay by cards. So that's one good example of how you might execute this. And the second one here is actually implementing a kind of fake option for checking the status of your claims with an insurer. So you can report a claim, but they also wanted to gauge whether an online kind of portal to tell you where you were in that process of your claim was valuable. When clicked, you say, unfortunately, it's not available at the moment, but please give us a call and we'll help you out here. So again, it was just really, rather than doing all the legwork to allow that portal to be up and running from the very beginning, finding out whether users actually would find it useful to access online.
So I suppose it's a hugely valuable way of getting real life data, whether people are prepared to click, but then also it's mitigating the business impacts. It's not a terrible user experience. People kind of accept it. I guess that's the trick. If they get upset because they can't get something, it could be a problem for you. So then we're going into the optimization program. We're looking at progress. Talk us through that in terms of the way you approach it.
Yeah, so progress in the sense of particularly with forms is just setting expectations with users, right? So don't have any hidden surprises in your forms in those journeys across those steps. These surprises can be things like costs, delays in terms of when you might receive the item, availability, extra info you didn't necessarily know that was required from you. Users are in your forms, they're in your checkouts potentially. That's showing quite a level of commitment already. So adding unnecessary friction is just going to cause potential dropout and loss of engagement there. So outline the time and steps that are required to go through this journey, for users, when they're completing a form, when they set expectations around potential delivery, all those sorts of things. Doing this earlier before users get into the kind of, the depths of the form is usually better. It just prepares people and allows them to know, maybe if they're on the run, maybe on the mobile, which is happening more and more now. We obviously talked about mobile traffic earlier. People don't always have the same kind of, I guess, free time potentially when they're in the form that you may necessarily think they do. So bear that in mind and set expectations early. And if you do have longer forms as well, one of the things to consider is obviously splitting that out so the perceived kind of effort is kind of reduced somewhat. Generally speaking, longer forms benefit from more steps, even though in most cases people would suggest that forms, generally speaking, are better when they're shorter. So.
Yeah. I mean, we would definitely, concur with that. The data we see, and we have a lot of financial services clients, as you would expect, because we look at, problems with forms, and they have long, complicated forms, and pretty much without exception, unless it's a pretty simple form, the conversion rate and user experience is improved when you do break it down into manageable chunks, so people aren't being scared off. I mean, we've seen forms where there's like 100 fields on one page, and people don't even start the form. But actually, once you chunk it down, it's like I've committed, particularly if you allow them to save and come back, which in a financial services case is often important because they might need to go away and check some information that they might not have to hand. So I think that definitely makes sense. So, I mean, sort of, you've got some examples here, I think.
Yeah, it's a couple of good examples of like setting expectations up front, right? Different ways of doing this. So if you look at these, I think top left, if anyone's ever been on the UK government website, they'll recognize the font here. This is just passport renewal, but it's just reminding users of the item they need before they start this process and go through the forms required to kind of renew that. And then on the right, again, I suspect many folks in the UK at least will recognize the brand in there as well. And this is just telling you about how quickly you can get a car valuation, all right, based on your mileage and your registration. So a couple of good ways just to set expectations at the very beginning that this is what you need and this is how long it's going to take.
Yeah, certainly. And I would certainly recommend, if you're looking for a template, the UK government forms template, which they share openly, anyone can copy. Basically, it is very good. It's tried and tested for being a good user experience in terms of error messaging, validation, and that sort of thing. So yeah, again, if you're unsure where that is, you can come to either of us, and we can send you a link, because it's kind of open to anyone to look at. Then sort of moving on to more a design principle here, I guess, which is less is more, which I think we're kind of both aligned with. But how does that manifest itself in a form scenario?
Yeah, well, obviously, it's, I guess, less is more. I think it was coined, it says here, by, and it's more an architectural principle in the beginning, but I think it applies to so many aspects of what we do, not just us, but what everybody does really in their lives and in their work. So I think it's very true of digital design, forms and checkouts, in most cases, where it's possible to have less, then that's usually better for user experience and conversion. Typically, loads of sites include all this extra information. It could be add-on pages, it could be review steps, it could be optional fields that are really designed to benefit the company but not necessarily the user, and consequently these tend to add very little to the bottom line, but just slow users progress, right? So you can ask some of this information, but it's about where and when you ask it that's quite important. So maybe you flip some of the requests to after the form submission. For instance, maybe on email confirmation, maybe email, maybe a phone call or an on-site visit, those sorts of things, where you might ask for that additional rich information that's going to help you and then help you to help the customer, but without actually breaking kind of down the initial kind of communication, or slowing that down, should I say. So that can be really quite helpful. Mandatory versus optional fields, again, that's another one to review. Where are the gaps there that for you, and where are the gaps maybe for the customer that you may need to close out? And just trying to help users complete tasks, kind of pre-populate things, right? So you've got conditional logic that you can apply to a lot of form fields, which mean that people can take more customized journeys based on what the information they're giving you. So don't make them have to skip things that aren't relevant, which I know has, from my experience, is something that still happens quite a bit. Make sure you do the correct inputs for correct fields. I'm always flabbergasted by the amount of times that you'll get, alphabetical characters showing up in phone numbers field still, and the keyboard's not displaying in the right format for that. Address finders, I think you touched on as well, Alan, before. Email validators, and even payment options to a degree. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to hand complete control over to others in this journey, but some payment options will kind of help streamline your processes there and your forms.
No, it makes sense. And I kind of, with this whole concept, I'd recommend people have a look at Caroline Jarrett, who's one of the sort of original form optimizers back in the 90s. And we've done a webinar on this very topic. She's got a framework called Prune, Tune, Postpone, Explain, which is looking at each of your fields. Can you prune it? Can you get rid of it? Can you tune it to make it better? Do you need to ask it now? Can you ask it later? And things like that. So it's very good framework to see, bring your form down and make it as concise as possible. But again, if you struggle to find that framework, you can contact me on LinkedIn and I'll share it. Similar principle, design principle about clarity as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, be clear and be concise, I guess. So it sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times it doesn't happen, right? So just simply making fields marked clearly on what's expected from the user, make sure the fields are labeled correctly, and if there's any uncertainty, having help options that are very kind of clear and obvious and prompt users in the right direction without busying the page up, right? So we talked about optional versus mandatory fields, and do you show these optional only tagged, or do you show mandatory only? I guess it would depend on the number of fields you have potentially and which way round you'd like to kind of structure that, how long on the spectrum between those two your particular business has. Why do you need certain details from users as well? That's something that often isn't communicated very well. If it's for better customer service, for order detail communication, then it's valuable for the user, and you should tell them that they're asking for this personal bit of information because you want them to be informed and up to date, and if they have any problems, be able to get in contact with you, or vice versa, quickly and easily. So I've run a number of tests where we've made certain fields mandatory that you wouldn't necessarily think should be mandatory, because it really helps with that order tracking for users. Form optimization, as we talked about, and account creation is becoming kind of even more important, I guess, as we I've been heading down the ITP, ETP route with browsers and security when it comes to third party and just cookie tracking in general. Obviously, Google this year are also planning to finally close out some of those loopholes that they've been keeping open by comparison to Firefox and Safari. And where do you position some of these kind of important account creation pieces as well in your forms? If you have a guest journey or a guest option, where does that sit in the journey? And do you still ask users to create an account at some point? Is it upfront or is it on order confirmation? Could you do it in email as well, as we talked about delaying on previous slides? How you ultimately, with the move to ITP and ETP, having first party data with users signing up and creating an account with you becomes more valuable in terms of having that two-way communication and be able to, I guess, show value or an exchange of value with the user as well. But I mean, you want to kind of move beyond just the initial new customer sign up discount when you kind of talk to those sorts of things. That's quite common, but really what you're looking for is, and the occasional sales email, really, what can you do when it comes to early access, exclusive access? What valuable content maybe can you give these users in exchange for them having a direct connection with you? That's kind of that's kind of, as I said, these changes in security ends have made it more and more important. And I think some businesses could do with kind of reevaluating that and maybe kind of trying to kind of work harder, I suppose, at that value exchange in order to generate that sign up.
Makes absolute sense. And I think the guest checkout is the classic example you talk about. Actually, you can see the uplifts often when people put in a guest checkout rather than forcing people to make the account creation. So it's always test around that when you're looking at it. Conscious of time, so we'll move on to sort of a couple of the final pieces on error messages, which are absolutely critical to testing and improving and optimizing any form. I'm sure you've seen many good and bad error messages in your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, obviously online versus inline, should I say, rather than an on-click are the two most common approaches here. You can obviously have negative, which tends to be the on-click approach, positive, which tends to be online, but actually, or more so, but actually can be both. And I guess you can do both well and you can do both badly, I guess is the comment here, right? So if you've got a large form, on-click can be quite overwhelming if you have quite a large number of mistakes. Conversely, inline, if you're very kind of overly trigger happy with the validation, then you can also put people off or distract people. So getting that, it's kind of a fine-tuning sweet spot when it comes to optimizing that and running experiments to find out what works best. So always got to review the sensitivity there. How can you also help users with, we talked about address validators, email validators, phone validators, those sorts of things. Again, as we can see here in this great example, it's correcting actually a user's incorrect input, which is really helpful, right? Just saving people time. It's not even particularly long form. Clarity of error is another. What the final thing I'll say on errors really is the fact that I'm surprised still how common an issue it is where it's not very obvious where the error's been generated from, and it might even be completely disconnected from where you are on the page. I've seen scenarios where the button, where your next step button is blocked because your error there, but you have to scroll back up the page to read the error, and the error is not attached to the field where the error was generated, and it's a very generic error, right? So you've then got to put your investigation hat on to be able to actually make it through the next step of the form, which seems a bit bonkers in this day and age, but it still happens.
No, we see a lot of bad and confusing error messages there. So I mean, it's critical. If you can only really sort out one thing, sort out your error messages is what I'd say. Test that, and we've seen some very good improvements from moving from on-click to inline validation. Sometimes that can, I mean, obviously you've got to test it, but can work very well to giving people immediate feedback rather than having on-click and them having, as you say, having to try and find the error and correct it. As well. So just to kind of finish off, just sort of one thing that I'll talk about is around the area of the broad hypotheses that we see at Zuko in terms of the broad issues that you want to try and diagnose and investigate and test and experiment and improve. And there's kind of 6 areas there. So first one is motivation. So the users are not serious or motivated to complete the form, so you're getting people there who, wrong type of traffic. So to diagnose that, you need to do some segmentation analysis, look if paid traffic is just not converting versus, say, organic traffic, and use that as well. So you'll have very low view to start rates in your data. Second, broad category is user is unwilling to provide the data. So often that might be around sensitive data, financial data, medical data. You're like, okay, they don't want to, they wouldn't realize they have to give it. And so that's where you look at your granular abandonment rates there and look at the differences in behavior between certain groups. Third area is around they're unable to give you the information. You're asking them for something that they don't have. So passport, driver's license number, something complex. What are your classic one on a financial form? How many assets do you have? I don't know. I've got to go and get my calculator out and try and work it out. So again, there you look at the fields that are not slotting information that people know about off the top of their head, looking at abandonment rates, looking at whether you should be testing, putting, as the UK Gov example we had earlier, an expectation management at the start. This is what you will need before you even start it. Fourth area is kind of technical, broken UX. You've got the form that's broken, something button doesn't work or what have you. So again, to diagnose that, that's essentially getting into the weeds, playing with your form, seeing if it actually breaks. So a bit of user testing or session replay can also be great to diagnose that. Fifth area is some questions are too intimidating or complex, putting people off. They drop out there as well. So you see that often with education forms. You're asking for long educational questions. And interestingly enough, to diagnose that, often you look at the data for the question prior to the intimidating one, because what you'll see is a big drop-off rate there, because people complete that question, have a look at the next one and go, oh my goodness, I'm leaving now, and then they drop off. And then the kind of final area, which is classic with e-commerce, is you're driving people to external sites and they don't come back. Example, discount codes. We see this all the time on a checkout. People see a discount code, they go fishing elsewhere, they can't find it, they get lost, they get distracted, they see a competitor, they're gone. So actually that's something as a broad hypothesis. Do you want to test? Do you want to be doing this? Do you want to be hiding the code? Things like that. So they're kind of the broad areas we see. So, I mean, that's the bulk of the content we're going to talk about today. Before we finish up, I appreciate there's a little bit of a delay on LinkedIn Live, so I'm going to ask, if you have any questions, can you drop them in now while I kind of just wrap up with the piece? So any questions, please drop them in and we'll answer them as they come in. But in terms of the rest of it, as we said, broad principles, this is yours, Luke, but when in doubt.
It is, yeah. So I like to end with a little bit of humor here, and I think, but also a message, right? So I think fundamentally, when in doubt, you should always aim to be helpful, not creepy, right? So when it comes to experimentation, personalization, form optimization, you're wanting to help users in the end achieve a goal. You don't want to necessarily appear to be unhelpful or following people around potentially. So always bear that in mind. It should be an overriding principle that you're there to help. You're there to remove barriers and friction. So that is where I will end.
Okay, great. Well, if you want to know more, as we said, you can get hold of any of us here. Here's our details. Feel free to scan these for our LinkedIn profile, so you can just search for them. We've got our email addresses there. Any questions about optimization, experimentation, forms, how they work, how Zuko works, how SiteSpect works, because obviously we are integrated tools. We have integration, so we work together with many clients on optimizing forms. So with SiteSpect running the A/B tests, essentially the platform enables you to do that. And then Zuko will give you the granular data into form behavior and how things differ and that sort of thing. So any questions about that, let us know. You can also get us in person. We are going to be at Experimentation Elite conference in London in June. So if you are going there, we'd love to see you. If you are not going yet and want a ticket, we've got some discount codes because we both sponsor the conference. So they're on there. Feel free to use those to get yourself a discount ticket to Experimentation Elite. It's we've been there a number of times. It's great fun, and there's a lot of great speakers talking about experimentation and optimization. So you'll get a lot out of it, I know from experience as well there. So that's essentially the bulk of what we got today. I'll just leave it a moment to see if any questions are coming in. I don't know if we will get any more questions. I'm not seeing any come through, but you can drop them in the comments. So just leave it a moment, see if we have any questions. But typically questions we get, if we don't get any here, then often they're around, how do you go around implementing analytics on it? So again, that's to do with finding the right sort of analytics. So if you want to run tests, then it's platforms such as SiteSpect. If you want to look at form analytics, you can do some basic stuff with Google Analytics. If you want to hack together some interaction data, or you can, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Obviously, you can use Zuko, take 5 minutes, install, and what it'll start doing is pulling all the interactions on your forms straight away.
Wow, you could use SiteSpect to deploy Zuko as well if you want.
Of course, yeah, that's the other thing, yeah. Indeed, or best of all worlds. So I don't know if we've got any questions coming through. I know you've got a hard stop, Luke, to go. So I suggest, unless we get anything through now, then we will wrap things up. As I say, this will be available on video recording and slides if you want them. We'll make them available to you, and we'll be in touch to let you know how you can get them. But apart from that, let's finish up now.
I was going to say as well, Alan, just if anyone does have questions but they don't necessarily want to fire them over in a public forum, I guess they are happy to do it directly to us as well. Obviously connected via LinkedIn and so on. So feel free to do that as well.
Great. Okay, well, I'll end this LinkedIn Live broadcast now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.